There are but three constants in life: death, taxes, and the mid-year freakout tag taking over your subscription feed every July. Hi, welcome, come on in. My name is Aoife, and as you may have guessed, today I am taking the mid-year book freakout tag. This is one of the BookTube staples. Everybody does it. Everybody has got a huge backlog of all of the years that they've done it. I am no different, so I've also got a couple from around 2020 or 2021 onwards of all of my answers for this tag. It's one of my favorite tags to do because it really does give you a good chance to look back over the year's reading. And I actually did have to think about some of the questions this year for the first time. I really had to sit down and actually put brain power into saying what I wanted to say and whether or not these books actually fit into the questions that they were. Starting, of course, with question one: what is the best book that you have read so far in 2024? And that has to go to You Deserve Good Gelato by Casey Rose. I went into this relatively low expectations, but it completely blew me away. Casey Rose is a TikTok star. She is American, but she has been living in Italy on and off for about 6 years or so. She first went over in 2018 just on a little solo trip for herself, mainly spent a lot of time around Florence and went to a little jazz bar in the evening, met her now fiance there, and the two of them tried to make it work between their two separate countries. They spent some time together in the US with Casey and her family, and now they are both living back full-time in Dario's home country of Italy. Something that really resonated with me with this book is how it was with the immigrant experience. I myself am an immigrant. I've been living in Germany for 7 years now, so there was so much about this book that just genuinely rang true with me. Whether it is about the cultural differences that you and a partner who is of a different culture may have, if you've had different upbringings, if you have different backgrounds, you have different native languages, you have different styles of communication just based on cultural upbringing. That was something that really resonated with me, and it is something that I have noticed myself. She also deals a lot with homesickness and how she would have dealt with that and how isolating it can feel to move to a new country for the first time, a completely new culture, completely new way of living. Maybe you're not so au fait with the language, you don't know a whole lot about the customs that are here. For example, when I first moved to Germany, I had absolutely zero idea that everything shuts down on a Sunday. The only things that you will find open are restaurants, supermarkets only in airports or train stations, anything that is like a big shop, any big grocery stores, clothes shops, bookshops, anything like that is going to stay closed all day. So it did really take me a long time to adjust to having to get all of my groceries on a Friday or on a Saturday evening and having all of Sunday to myself. And if you run out of something, what do you do then and where do you go? There is also a lot about learning a new language and immersing yourself into a brand new culture. These are all just things that I have lived day to day for the last 7 years. So reading a book about somebody else who was struggling with the same things that I was struggling with and having the same wins that I was having, it was such a validating experience. I think that is the main reason that I resonated with this book so much. I think if I hadn't moved country, if I wasn't living in a new area, I probably would have enjoyed it, but it wouldn't have hit so hard. Question 2, what is the best sequel that you read in 2024? Hands down, it has to be Heartstopper Volume 5 by Alice Oseman. This was one of my most anticipated books for the second half of 2023, and I ate it whole when I got to it. This is, of course, about Nick and Charlie, who are now on the cusp of separation. Nick is about to go off to university, and he has been looking around at campuses, but he's always considered staying around home and staying at their local university. However, an open day at a university a little bit further away really started to change his mind. Charlie is going to be left behind as he is a year younger than Nick, and they are really wondering about what's going to happen when Nick goes away for university, when they're not seeing each other on a day-to-day basis, when they're not at school together anymore. Is their relationship going to stand the test of time, basically? I have every faith in these two that they are going to make it work. I feel like the hopes of an entire generation rest on these two shoulders. But something that I also loved about this book is that there is a really frank discussion about having sex for the first time as a teenager and the decisions that you need to make about that and the preparation that you need to make. But also what can happen when one of you goes off to university and the other one is still sitting in school. I cannot wait for the last book of this to come out. It is going to be a very bittersweet goodbye to the two boys. I've loved watching them grow up and grow closer together. I cannot wait to get that last book read. but I also don't want to say goodbye to the series. Question 3, what is a new 2024 release that you haven't read yet but you want to? I have been so influenced to read Truly Madly Deeply by Alexandria Bellfleur. I know so many people who have read this and who have loved it. I know that Brie and Cal had this as their Not Your Mom's Boozy Book Club book back in May, I think that it was, and my copy still hadn't arrived, so I hadn't had the chance to catch up with them and I hadn't had the chance to read it with them. But I do know that they have got a live show of their discussion still on one of their channels that when I'm finished with this, I am definitely going to go and check that out. I also know that Julie from Keep Calm with Books and Coffee read this as part of the Amazing Readathon as she was on Team Romance, and I have a feeling she got on really well with this. I think she gave it maybe a 3.5 to a 4 stars. There is only one person that I know who hasn't given this a very high rating, but I feel like there is enough of them stacking up now. I just need to find out what happens. The book is about Colin and Truly, who are put together as podcast hosts at a radio station, and they clash horns pretty much instantly. But when the ice starts to melt and when they find out that they have quite a lot of things in common with each other, they really start to build a really great formation. I am so interested to see what happens here. I've loved every single other book by Alexandria Bellfleur that I've read so far, so I have the highest hopes for this one. Question 4, what is your most anticipated release for the second half of 2024? I genuinely cannot wait to read Love Story by Lindsay Kelk. Yes, it is a Taylor reference in the title, and that's not the only reason that I want to read it. I have a feeling that this is going to be Lindsay's spiciest book to date, and I have been so excited to watch her turn the heat up just a little bit. Love Story is about Sophie and Joe. They have been friends for years and years, but Sophie has been harboring a huge secret from him. She is not just Sophie, his best friend, she is also Estee Cox, one of the world's biggest and most renowned romance writers. But right now, she's going through a little bit of a dry spell. When Joe and Sophie are put together in a tiny little cottage right in the middle of nowhere with only one bed, it turns out that Sophie's secret might be about to come out, and there might be some pretty sparky consequences due to that. I have loved every single book by Lindsay Kelk that I've read so far, and she is one of my auto-buy authors, so this soared up to the top of my must-have list when I heard about it. Question 5 is, what was your biggest disappointment in your reading this year? And I am so devastated to say that it was Aisling Ever After by Sarah Breen and Emer McLysaght. I had waited and waited for this book. I loved the series so far, and I was so hopeful about what would happen to Aisling in the final book. As we left her, she was living in New York. She was just after getting into a new relationship with somebody who truly deserved her. And then her ex-boyfriend shows up on her front door. She and her ex-boyfriend John get back together. They decide to both move back to Ireland. And the situation of John proposing to Aisling comes up every 15 pages. I am not exaggerating here. It is constant and it is tedious. It just gave the book a huge sour feeling for me because Aisling had gone through so much personal growth in the 4th book. She had left the country. She had started a whole new life for herself. I feel like she had really gotten a brand new personality and gotten a whole new set of self-confidence for herself. And then when we go to Aisling Ever After, all of that is basically swept out with the tide. I really wish that they had gone with a completely different direction for this book. And all of the things that were happening in the background as well, with Aisling's mother being in a relationship after widowhood and Aisling's best friend who was having a baby, I just felt that all of that, there was so much happening that it all felt like everything has to be tied up with a bow. So we have to make all of these stories a happy ending, even if some of them didn't necessarily deserve or need that. I was so disappointed with how this book had gone, and I wasn't the only one. There were a couple of people that I spoke to when I put my review of this online. There were a couple of people that I had spoken to and said, I didn't love this, and they responded, actually neither did I. So I think that this is a quite popular opinion with people who have read the book. We all just wish it had gone in a different direction. On the flip side, what is your biggest surprise of this year? I hadn't picked up anything from Tia Williams yet, but when I picked up a copy of A Love Song for Ricky Wilde, I instantly knew that I had to read every other thing that she has read. This book had a little touch of magical realism to it, which I really enjoyed. It really did give the book a whole kind of element to it that I wasn't expecting there to be. It is about Ricky Wilde, who is a daughter of one of Atlanta, Georgia's biggest funeral home conglomerate businesses. But she knows that this isn't the business that she wants to go into. She actually has got desires to have her own floral shop. So she moves to Harlem in New York City to basically get her own life and make a name for herself in a brand new community and in a brand new business area. She makes a whole host of characters here who she genuinely is accepted by and welcomed into the community by. And while she is there, she also one night at a party meets a young man who catches her eye instantly. When they meet again, she finds out that this guy is not exactly who he says that he is, but not for the reasons that you might be expecting him to say. And there is also a connection between him and one of her new closest friends that I, honest to goodness, never expected to have happen. I absolutely loved how this was written. Tia Williams' writing genuinely does it for me. I already have a copy of 7 Days in June on my physical TBR, and I've also gotten a copy of The Perfect Find on my Kindle, so that is definitely something that I need to take off before the end of this year. Question 7, who is your favourite new author? Be they a debut author or just somebody that you've not read from before. I absolutely loved Spirit Level by Richie Craven. He is a debut author and he's Irish, and he is the author of one of the funniest Twitter threads that I've ever read in my life. It is about his time working at M&S when he was about 16 or 17 years old, and basically saving Christmas was all on his shoulders. He takes all of the love and all of the heart and all of the humour that was in that Twitter thread and sticks it into the pages of this book. This is about Danny, who is about 24 years old and he's feeling a little bit directionless in life. He and his friend Nudge go to a house party one evening to welcome back one of their best friends who has just gone on a year travelling around the world, but is bringing her new boyfriend in tow with her. This is a slight issue because before Natasha had left, she and Danny had actually hooked up a couple of times and he was expecting things to pick up where they had left off. After the party, Nudge and Danny drive home together. Nudge has had a bit too much to drink, and this ends up with the two of them driving into the canal in Dublin. Nudge loses his life in the car accident, but Danny survives, and be it from survivor's guilt or be it from anything that Nudge still has to do around town, Danny can see Nudge's ghost when he is slightly tipsy. The two of them head around Dublin City to try and find answers as to why Nudge is still here, why Danny is the only one that can see him, and how they are going to let his spirit rest. This also had a great element of magical realism to it that I think was developed really well over the book, especially because it takes a lot of turns towards the last quarter or so of this book that I did not expect to see happening. It's such a fantastic read, and I would recommend it to absolutely everybody out there. Question 8, who is your newest fictional crush? Step forward, Miles Novak from Funny Story by Emily Henry. If you have watched New Girl and you have looked at Nick Miller and said, that is the man for me, Miles Novak is also the man for you. There are so many similarities between him and Nick that it is almost like Emily Henry watched an episode of New Girl and said, how can I make this a book? Miles is funny, he's clumsy, he's very kind of old man, codgery, stuck in his ways type person for like a 35-year-old man. He works in a bar, and the first time that we meet him, he has just been broken up with from his girlfriend Petra, and he is sitting in his room in his shared apartment with Daphne, who has also just been broken up by her boyfriend Peter, so that Peter and Petra can get together. Miles is sitting in his apartment, sobbing loudly and listening to Celine Dion. If that doesn't remind you of Nick Miller, I don't know what else is going to. I do have one issue with the cover of this book though. Where are these man's tattoos? In the book, he is canonically covered in tattoos, head to toe, arms length, everything. Where are the tattoos on this front cover? Who is your new favourite character from your reading this year? And I have gone with Mrs. Porter from Dear Mrs. Porter by A.J. Pierce. This is the third book in the Dear Mrs. Bird series, and I love to hate this woman. Mrs. Porter is brought in as the new editor-in-chief of Women's Friend when, at the beginning of Mrs. Porter Calling, Mr. Collins, who was the editor-in-chief, steps down so that he can go into a well-earned retirement. The book is set in 1943 in London, so as you can imagine, things are getting a little bit ropey with World War II, pretty much at its peak. Instead of promoting Emmy, who is one of the magazine's hardest workers and one of its most trusted writers, Mr. Collins brings in a young woman named Cressida Porter. She is not exactly what the magazine is looking for, and she has some brand new ideas that are going to basically stretch it so far you cannot recognize it anymore. Woman's Friend had been a real help to a lot of women who were left behind as their husbands were on the front line during the war. It had been the place that they would go to for advice. It had been the place that they would go to for new cooking recipes that fit into the rationing that everybody has to go through. But Mrs. Porter is not so enthusiastic about that and instead decides to turn it into a high society magazine. It is going to feature debutante balls, it is going to feature high society weddings, it's not going to feature any of the advice pages that there were previously or any of the recipes that there were previously, because it is just not a good look for her and her friends. Throughout the entire book, Emmy and her friends and her co-workers all kind of band together to get Cressida pretty much overthrown, and I really loved watching them coming together and putting all of their plans into place. But I took so much pleasure out of reading Mrs. Porter. She was kind of your head in the clouds socialite from the 1940s that you would have known from like movies or from depictions in TV shows. And I thought it was so interesting how she was written and the things that she would say. There are some of them that are still stuck in my brain to this day, and I read that book back in February. This is, as I know, the last book in the series, and I don't think we're going to be meeting any of the characters again soon, but that was quite a memorable way. To say goodbye to it. Question 10 is, what is the book that made you cry this year? I don't usually have an answer to that because I don't tend to get very emotional about books until I read A Heart That Works by Rob Delaney. This is about Rob's young son Henry, who was 2 years old when he passed away from brain cancer, with which he had only been diagnosed about a year previously. Rob goes through everything. You are basically brought from the moment Henry was conceived to the moment of his passing and his funeral. It is absolutely heartbreaking. You don't have to be a parent to have the huge emotional impact that this had on me. I spent so much of a train journey across Germany sobbing my eyes out at this book. It is written so beautifully. It's such a wonderful tribute to Henry, but it is also a poignant love letter to the NHS and to all of the doctors and the medical team who had taken care of Henry, to all of the people who had taken Rob into their hearts and who had helped out his family while they were going through all of this, and to the birth of their other son, who was born after Henry had been diagnosed, and how they adjusted to having a new member in the family when there was also so much turmoil happening. This book absolutely broke me in two. It is absolutely devastating, and there is a huge trigger warning for childhood cancer, for bereavement, for death, for grief. It is quite a hard-hitting read, but if it is the kind of book that you feel like you can go into, I cannot recommend it anymore. Question 11 is a book that made you happy, and again I have to go with You Deserve Good Gelato, mainly because of how validated it made me feel, of how it made me feel like I wasn't the only person in the whole world who had moved across the continent, who had moved to a new culture, a new country, a new language, a new way of living. It was a kind of thing that if you can do it, so can I. Even though I have been doing it for roughly the same time as Casey has been doing so, it just gave me such a boost to know that on my lower days, when I'm feeling really homesick, when I'm getting a little bit bogged down by all of the German bureaucracy that is needed, by everything being in a different language that I don't necessarily understand all the time, it just made me feel a little bit more secure that I am not the only person going through this, that there are hundreds of thousands of millions of people who also find themselves in the same shoes as I'm wearing, and if they can do it, why the hell can't I? Question 12, what is the most beautiful book that you have gotten so far this year? Whether you were sent it, whether you were bought it, or whether you got it as a gift. I absolutely love the cover of Hits Different by Tasha Ghouri and Lizzie Huxley-Jones. I have already read a book by Lizzie Huxley-Jones before. I read their Christmas romance book around the end of December last year, and I was so excited about reading Hits Different. It is about a girl called Cassie who is a dancer but is also born deaf and wears a cochlear implant. She moves to Ibiza as she is hired as a relief dancer because a touring pop star has had every single member of their dance troupe up sticks, mutiny, and go for another pop star instead. I absolutely loved the contents of this book, but the cover of it is just as stunning. It really does remind me of lying on the beach in the summer sun with it like shining straight down on your head, and just it gave me such a big summer vibe when I saw it that there was no other option but to read this by the water. It wasn't exactly in Ibiza, but it did do the trick just as well. Finally, question 13 is, what books can you not wait to read in the rest of 2024? As I've already said, I really need to get my hands on Love Story, but I also really want to read The Orange House by Isabel Broom. I absolutely love Isabel's writing because she will take you from your couch or your reading chair or wherever it is that you are reading and transport you right across the world with absolutely no strings attached. In The Orange House, we are following Henry and Violet, who've been married for years, and at the beginning of their marriage, they bought the Orange House, which was a little villa in Mallorca. They had envisioned that this would be their little summer recluse, and this is where they would go with their young son Luke, and they would spend all of their summers there, hanging out, being together, and just basking in the summer sun. However, about 20 years later, their marriage is really starting to show some cracks, and the word divorce has been brought up. In one final attempt to get everything smoothed out, Henry and Violet go to the Orange House so that they can pack everything up and get it ready to be put back on the market. But as they are papering over the cracks in the walls, are they also starting to paper over the cracks in their marriage? Those are my answers to this year's version of the mid-year Freakout Tag. What is the best book that you have read so far in 2024? If you would love to leave me a comment but you can't think of anything you'd like to say, then just leave me a calendar emoji. Don't forget to like and subscribe because I have new videos up every week. Now, get on out of here.